He walked into that courtroom as a decorated Navy SEAL, a man who had risked his life countless times for his country. But to one officer in that room, none of that mattered. One racist cop saw only the color of his skin. Within minutes, what should have been a routine hearing spiraled into chaos. An argument erupted. Shouts echoed through the chamber. And then it happened. The attack. But the cop had no idea who he had just laid hands on, because seconds later, the entire building shook. Marcus Cole wasn't just any man. He was a decorated U.S. Navy SEAL, a soldier who had served his country in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. Years of grueling missions, endless sacrifices, and countless scars, both seen and unseen. But today wasn't about combat. It wasn't about war. It was supposed to be simple, a court appearance over a minor property dispute. No danger, no weapons, no enemies, just a man hoping to get through the day quietly. The courthouse buzzed with the usual hum of activity, lawyers shuffling papers, families waiting anxiously, and security guards chatting near the doors. Marcus sat near the back, calm, collected, and confident. His life after the military had been about peace, about rebuilding, about finally leaving the chaos behind. But across the room, someone else was watching. Officer Bradley Kane, a man with a reputation, though not the kind anyone would want. Kane had a history of racial profiling, complaints buried under stacks of ignored reports, and whispers of aggression hidden behind his badge. And when his eyes locked on Marcus, something shifted. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a hero. He saw a target. Marcus had no idea that his life, his freedom, his dignity, was about to undergo a test unlike anything he had experienced on the battlefield. Because within minutes, what should have been an ordinary day in court would erupt into a storm of chaos, violence, and national outrage. The first sign came quietly. A sharp look, a tense silence, and then a step forward. The courtroom was quiet, filled only with the soft shuffle of papers and muffled whispers from the benches. Marcus sat with his hands folded, calm but alert, waiting for his case to be called. He had faced war zones before, but nothing about today suggested danger, until he noticed Officer Kane's stare. At first, Marcus ignored it. He'd seen that look before, the subtle narrowing of the eyes, the judgment hiding behind a badge. But when Kane began moving closer, Marcus felt the tension tighten like a noose. Then it started. "Stand up," Kane barked, his voice slicing through the murmurs of the courtroom. Heads turned. The judge paused mid-sentence, eyebrows knitting in confusion. Marcus blinked, unsure. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Kane snapped, one hand resting on his holster. "Stand. Up." A hush fell over the room. The weight of the moment settled heavy in the air. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was disbelief. He slowly rose, hands visible, calm and deliberate. "Officer, there must be a misunderstanding," Marcus said softly, his voice steady. But Kane's glare sharpened. "Misunderstanding. You fit the description. Step forward. Now." A murmur swept through the benches. People began pulling out their phones. Something about Kane's tone didn't sound like procedure. It sounded personal. Marcus hesitated, but before he could speak again, Kane stepped forward and shoved him hard in the chest. Gasps filled the room. A woman cried out. The judge slammed the gavel, shouting for order, but the chaos had already started. Marcus stumbled back, but didn't retaliate. Years of discipline kept his instincts in check, but Kane mistook restraint for weakness. UA. "Think that uniform makes you special?" Kane growled, his voice dripping with venom. "Not here. Not today." By now, security officers were moving in, but Kane blocked them with one outstretched arm, asserting authority he didn't have. "Hands behind your back," he ordered. "You're resisting arrest." "Resisting," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "I haven't moved." The tension was unbearable. Every second dragged like an eternity. The crowd leaned forward, phones raised, recording every moment. And then, the unthinkable. Kane reached for his weapon. A collective gasp erupted. Someone screamed. The courthouse erupted into chaos as security rushed forward, trying to separate the two. But before anyone could intervene, Kane had already pulled Marcus to the ground, pinning him face first against the cold marble floor. The decorated Navy SEAL, the man who had fought terrorists overseas, was being treated like a criminal in his own country, for no reason other than the color of his skin. Marcus's breathing grew ragged, not from fear, but from fury. And above him, Kane leaned down and whispered something only Marcus could hear. "This is my courtroom," phones were recording. People were shouting. And in the distance, the faint sound of heavy boots pounding the floor began to grow louder. Something was coming. Something big. But Marcus didn't know it yet. Marcus's cheek pressed against the cold marble floor, his breath sharp and uneven. The weight of Kane's knee dug into his back, suffocating him, but the roar of the crowd drowned out everything else. Phones were up, people were shouting, and the judge pounded the gavel, demanding order. But there was no controlling this storm. Then suddenly, the doors burst open. A wave of military police stormed into the courtroom, boots pounding, voices, booming commands. "Step away from him. Now." Kane froze, startled by the sudden intrusion, but his grip on Marcus didn't loosen. The veins in his neck bulged as he barked back. "This is my arrest. Stand down." But these weren't ordinary officers. These were Marcus's own brothers in arms, elite soldiers who recognized one of their own being humiliated in front of the world. One MP stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Release him. That's a direct order." Kane's jaw tightened, refusing to back down. The tension in the room became unbearable. Seconds felt like hours. Marcus, still pinned, could only hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. This was the moment. One wrong move, one twitch, and everything could spiral into tragedy. Then it happened. Kane reached for his weapon. The crowd screamed. Phones shook as people scrambled for cover. But before Kane could unholster his gun, two military police tackled him to the ground, ripping his arms behind his back. The entire room exploded into shouts and gasps. Marcus struggled to his feet, his uniform rumpled, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Around him, chaos raged. Officers arguing, the judge yelling, reporters snapping pictures. But Marcus stood still, his gaze fixed on Kane, who was now restrained and screaming from the floor. For a brief moment, silence returned. The military police formed a protective wall around Marcus, shielding him from further harm. But everyone in that courtroom knew this wasn't over, because Kane wasn't acting alone. Somewhere in the system, powerful forces wanted Marcus silenced, and today was only the beginning. The courtroom was silent now. Kane had been dragged out in handcuffs, his furious shouts echoing down the hallway until they faded completely. Marcus sat on the wooden bench, his hands trembling, his breaths still shallow. He wasn't thinking about the cameras or the headlines. He was just trying to process what had happened, and what almost happened. He had walked into court that morning believing in the system, believing that truth and justice would protect him. But in seconds, he had been thrown to the floor, treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. It didn't matter that he was a decorated Navy SEAL. It didn't matter that he had served his country with honor. In that moment, none of it protected him. And Marcus knew this wasn't just his story. Because for every Marcus, there are millions whose names never make the news. People were stopped, searched, humiliated, and even killed simply for existing while black. What happened today was caught on camera. But how many more stories will never be seen? How many more voices will never be heard? The military police escorted Marcus safely out of the courthouse, but the damage was already done. His uniform might have survived the struggle, but his faith in the system? Shattered. Later that night, Marcus sat alone, replaying the moment over and over, the sound of boots rushing in, the screams, Kane's hand reaching for his weapon. It could have ended differently. It almost did. And that thought would haunt him forever. But Marcus also knew this. Silence is dangerous. Stories like his need to be told, not just for him, but for every person who has faced the same injustice in silence. This isn't just one courtroom. This isn't just one cop. This is America's story. The question is, how many more times will it take before the world finally listens?